All right, good evening, everyone. This is going to be the last video on free will for this unit, and this is a response to the consequence argument that is used by certain kinds of compatibilists. A lot of compatibilists that respond to the consequence argument are going to be concerned with the notion of control that the argument itself refers to. Because if you think about the notion of control, it does tend to be a pretty vague concept. So, for example, I don't recommend doing this because you'll probably get a ticket, or worse, you'll find yourself in handcuffs or tased. But if during the wintertime uh, you are driving on a slippery patch of road and a police officer pulls you over and cites you for losing control of your vehicle or failing to maintain control over your vehicle, you might want to ask the police officer what sort of notion of control they have in mind here. So, to say that you have some kind of control over your vehicle, what exactly does that entail? Clearly, you don't have any control or any determination about how combustion works or about how acceleration works or anything like that. But clearly, these things are necessary in order for your vehicle to do what it does. I mean, in fact, if there were no such thing as combustion, you wouldn't be driving a car at all. If how acceleration works and things like that were different, driving would not be possible. So, in some sort of vague quasi sense, you have some influence over the overall direction or your vehicle is going or the overall speed your vehicle is going. But if by control we mean sort of complete self determining control, then clearly none of us have that kind of control over anything. So, since the consequence argument appeals to this notion of control, the compatibilist might just push back and say, okay, well then the non-compatibilist, the incompatibilist, is the one that needs to provide the actual notion of control that they're working with here. So those two crucial premises, premise one and premise two, the fact that I have no control over the past and I have no control over the laws of nature. On one reading of control, it might actually be possible in some sense that I exercise some control over the past, and I do exercise some control over the relevant laws of nature. Okay, so this is going to be kind of a comical example, but you'll see what I mean here. Okay, so this is what all of you are going to do this weekend. You're going to go to the stores. Just forget about that whole self quarantine thing that's going on right now. And you're going to purchase a magic 8 ball. And this magic 8 ball is going to be infallible, meaning all of its predictions come true, right? So you're going to have the infallible 8 ball or the almighty 8 ball, okay? Now, and this 8 ball doesn't just give responses like yes or forget it or don't even think about it and things like that. This 8 ball gives very specific predictions. So you take your infallible 8 ball and you shake it up and you flip it over, and this is what it says. The 8 ball says, in 5 years, you will freely marry someone from your philosophy class. Yep. So all of you might want to get on the current class roster and look around, because since this magic 8 ball is infallible and all of its predictions necessarily come true, that means that it's going to happen. It's going to happen. It is settled right now that in 5 years you are going to freely marry somebody from your philosophy class. So look around. Except me. I'm already married. Now, the important question here, though, is what actually explains what here. So suppose 5 years from now, I actually get a wedding invitation from you and the other student from philosophy class. And I remember having you both in class, and I say, wow, I can't believe these two are getting married. And I actually attend the wedding because, hey, I've got nothing better to do. It's not like I have a wife and 3 kids and a cat to take care of. Plus, there's an open bar. So I figure, hey, yeah, what the hell? I'll go to the wedding. So after the ceremony and everything, during the reception, during the dancing, I come up to you and say, hey, and you say, oh, thank you so much for coming. We're glad you could come. And then I ask you kind of how all of this came to be. I remember having you two in class, all those years ago, 5 years ago. What happened? So, what I'm asking for is a story. I'm asking for an explanation of how it is that you came to be married. Now, it would be absurd for you to say this. It would be absurd when I ask you for a story about how you came to be married. It would be absurd for you to say, oh, we got married because the magic 8 ball said we would. How? I mean, the magic 8 ball did not cause anything to happen here, right? The magic 8 ball did not cause you to get married. No, you would say this. You would say, well, we watched that video on those videos on free will that you posted, and then we decided to violate the self quarantine order and meet up at a coffee shop. We found an open coffee shop, and we fell in love, and we got married, blah blah blah. That's the kind of story you would tell. You would tell a story about getting to know each other, dating, falling in love, purchasing a puppy together, all of that sort of stuff, and then eventually getting married. You wouldn't say we got married because the magic 8 ball said that we would. So the fact that the magic 8 ball predicts that you're going to get married in 5 years, that's not what explains why you're getting married. It's the fact that you're getting married in 5 years which explains the 8 ball's prediction. The reason why the 8 ball gave you that particular prediction is because that is what you are going to do 5 years from now. Now, so this means that it's what you're going to do in the future, which explains this relevant past prediction, right? It's not a present prediction which explains what you're going to do in the future. It's what you're going to do in the future that explains why you got this prediction rather than a different prediction. Because this is the case. It's the case that if you would have done differently in the future, the prediction that the 8 ball gave you would have been different, right? If in the future you would have done something else, that means the prediction that you would have gotten today or this weekend, I guess I said. So if you would have done something different in the future, that means that the relevant past, which is right now, this weekend, would have been different, right? So it's not the prediction that explains or causes you to do anything in the future. It's some future fact, the fact that you are freely going to marry this person in 5 years. That's what explains the prediction. Okay. Now, so if we understand control in terms of something that we could call counterfactual relevance, even though you may not have direct determining control over the past events, and you do not have any direct or determining control over the laws of nature, it does seem to be the case that what you do is counterfactually relevant to the past and is counterfactually relevant to the laws of nature. So, since it's true that if you would have done differently in the future, then the prediction, the magic 8 ball, would have been different. It's also the case that if you would have done otherwise, then the past would have been different, right? So if you would have done otherwise, then the past would have been different. And it's also the case that if you would have done otherwise, then the laws of nature would have been different. So those two things apply directly to the first two premises of the consequence argument. So the first premise of the consequence argument says, I don't have any control over the future, or I'm sorry, I don't have any control over the past events. And then the second premise of the consequence argument says, I have no control over the laws of nature. Well, yeah, if by control we mean complete determining control, causal control, nomological control or something like that, that clearly is true. But if that's not the appropriate notion of control that we're talking about here, if what we mean is counterfactual relevance, then what you do now is counterfactually relevant to the past and is counterfactually relevant to the laws of nature. So, what a compatibilist can do here is say, well, yeah, if I desire to do something and there's nothing preventing me from doing it, then I'm going to do it. However, if I would have desired differently and there was nothing preventing me from acting on a different desire, then I would have done differently. And since it's possible that I could have desired differently, that means it's possible that I could have done differently. So a compatibilist will say this. A compatibilist will say, if it's the case that I always act in accordance with my strongest desire and my strongest inclination, and it's the case that there's nothing preventing me from acting in accordance with that strongest desire or inclination, then it just seems to be inevitable that that's what I'm going to do. So if I strongly desire to eat tacos, there are tacos available, and there's nothing preventing me from eating the tacos, it just seems inevitable that I'm going to eat the tacos. But if it's inevitable, it's determined. So if my desires and my environment and the circumstances in which I'm behaving, if those kinds of things are the important factors in my making decisions and my acting, if it's the case that I strongly desire tacos, there are tacos available, and there's nothing preventing me from eating them, if these three conditions, at the very least, mean that I'm going to eat those tacos anytime all three of these conditions are in place, that's determinism. That's what it means for my actions to be determined. So the compatibilist might say to the libertarian, you guys are having to try and have your cake or have your tacos and eat it too here. So you want to say that our actions have explanations and that our actions are in some sense spontaneous, but a lot of compatibilists will just say those two things do not go together. If my actions are spontaneous, they have no explanation, and if my actions have explanations, then they can't be spontaneous. Right? Okay, so once again, you may not find any of this compelling. I can't tell you what you're supposed to believe here, but in this series of videos, we've at least had several different perspectives on these topics, and I hope you found them informative. All right, have a good night.